To deal with prisons being overcrowded, the government is planning to let more prisoners out early on good behaviour. They were advised to do this by a former government minister. We will speak to him and find out the areas where he doesn't agree with what the government is going to do. That's all in this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and shortly I'll be joined by two of the BBC's top editors because there's big news today about public sector pay, and it's got quite a lot of consequences. But first of all, let's talk about this review into sentencing policy, where the former Justice Secretary David Gauke has made loads of recommendations, and the current Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood has accepted nearly all of them. The big headlines are a reduction in the number of short sentences under 12 months, and a new scheme where people can be let out early for good behaviour, along with lots of other tweaks to things like community punishments and also using medication to manage sex offenders to prevent them reoffending. So there is lots and lots to untangle here. So why don't we speak to the person who's written 170-ish pages on it? It's the author of the Sentencing Review, the former Conservative Justice Secretary, David Gauke. And David Gauke is here now. Hello.
Hello. Hi.
First of all, it must be quite kind of intellectually interesting doing a review like this, especially when you're in government, you're sort of just firefighting a lot of the time rather than thinking.
It is fascinating. It's great to have an opportunity to really concentrate on some big issues. I mean, there are some parallels with being in office. It's being a minister, you're not always firefighting. But yes, it is good to have the sort of freedom to focus on a particular area, and you can be more focused on getting the correct answer, I think, than necessarily on the sort of politically the easiest answer. But having said that, we're sort of operating in a political world. So, we wanted to come forward with a set of recommendations that were implementable. And I believe that's what we've done. And given that the Justice Secretary has accepted most of them, I think we've managed to do that.
Oh, but that's interesting. So it's not total blue skies thinking, because you don't want to come up with something that just could never be delivered.
Yeah, I don't think there's any great value in coming up with something which, if you like, virtue signals and sort of we pat ourselves on the back and here's great purity. I didn't want a report that was going to sit on the shelf. There's also there's real urgency about this. We have got a problem as a country, and we've got to solve that problem urgently, or we are back in the position of emergency releases. And I don't want that to happen. I don't think that's good for the country. So, something that was, entirely academic and unusable, I don't think would be serving anybody's purpose.
And it's interesting that the diagnosis that you have of why the prisons are full, I mean, it's partly because not enough places have been built to keep pace with the number of people going to prison, but it's not solely down to there being, in fact, it's not really down to there being more crime.
No, not at all. No, I mean, the trend, there are individual crimes that are rising have risen in recent years, but the overall trend on crime is that it's been falling since the 1990s. The fundamental cause has been something of a bidding war between political parties to extend sentences or introduce new offences with custodial sentences. That's really what has driven it. And it's a pretty dramatic increase. The prison population, this is a statistic I've used in almost every interview I've done today, but the prison population in 1993 was 44,000. Today it's 88,000. It's doubled over 32 years. And it's forecast to rise, save for these recommendations, is forecast to rise by 3,000 a year for the next few years as well. So we'll soon be above 100,000 and what have you. These are dramatic increases in the prison population.
Right, let's talk about some of the things that you've recommended, and most of which the government has taken up today, because we heard Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, talking about it in the House of Commons. First of all, this idea about sentences of 12 months or less, there's a sort of thing in there that you've got rid of them altogether. What's actually happening?
Not quite. So what we have said is that one should only have a sentence of 12 months or less in exceptional circumstances. Now, what does exceptional mean? Well, fundamentally, that will be for the courts to work out and to apply on a case-by-case basis. But we've given 3 illustrations where matters could be exceptional. So if someone has breached a court order, if somebody is serving a community sentence or a suspended sentence and then commits another crime. And then the third one is in a domestic abuse case where the court concludes that the victim just needs a period of respite. Given that domestic abuse cases very often involve a breakup of a relationship and in very difficult circumstances, that there may be times where the victim needs a breathing space to sort their life out. So we've those are illustrations, and the courts may find an exception in those circumstances. So that's where we are. The consequence of our recommendation will be fewer short sentences than we have at the moment. There's good reason for that. The reoffending rate for short sentences is very grim, it's very high, and by and large there's very little purpose served. Nothing can be done for rehabilitation whilst people are inside for a short period of time. And rehabilitation often involves a job, a home, family life, and short sentence tends to be pretty destructive for all of those things.
So you would say, hand on heart, this is something you're recommending because it's better for the prisoners, it's better for society. It's not just that it's a shortcut to freeing up some prison places.
You put it very well. When I was Justice Secretary, I was looking to pursue a very similar policy, and at that time we didn't have a capacity crisis. I was looking to do that because I felt it was the right thing to do to reduce reoffending. So yes, that's absolutely right. Of course, it does have a benefit. We identify that will have a saving of something like 2,000 prison places. But yes, I think that would be the right thing to do in any event.
And then talk us through this concept of basically good behaviour earning a person's release. And that release could come as soon as 1/3 of the way through their sentence.
That's right. I mean, remember that following the measures that were taken last year, at the moment, people are being released 40% of the way through their sentence.
Yeah, and 40% was controversial. 33% is...
Yeah, it was. I mean, there are some differences here, and part of that is about good behaviour. And by the way, I think we need to be much more transparent and open with people about when there is a sentence. There's a certain amount that will be in custody. There's a certain amount that will be a period of time where you will be under more intense supervision within the community, and that's where the tagging comes in, and potentially home detention or curfews or whatever it might be. And then a period of time where you're on licence, and basically the requirement is don't reoffend. If you do reoffend, then you could be back in prison. But I think there are a number of benefits for this. I think real incentives within the system to behave, to reward good behaviour, punish bad behaviour, will make it easier to control prisons. I think it will improve behaviour within prisons. It will therefore help with rehabilitation. I don't think we should forget also about this middle third, where we say, we actually are going to have to properly supervise people within the community. I mean, that does demand more for probation from probation, but I think it's right that we focus on that stage. And there is the opportunity to protect the public through use of electronic tagging and what have you. So I think that is a sensible, pragmatic response to the situation, and I think it does have the benefit of improving behaviour within our prisons.
But does this mean we'll have to design a system of how many marks you get for certain behaviours in prison so that everyone is treated fairly, or will this be at the discretion of the probation service or the prison governors, or how will it actually work?
So it'll be for the prison governors to operate, but you're right, and we make the point that, for example, we'll need to do checks in terms of the equality impacts, that this doesn't have any unintended adverse consequences on that front.
So it's easier for some kinds of people to get good points and others not?
Well, we need to make sure that the system is acting fairly. The default, essentially your starting point is that you would get out after a third. But if you misbehave, and that could be violence within prison, that could be having contraband articles, drugs, or whatever it might be, then there would be a consequence for that. We say that it's for the MOJ and the Prison Probation Service to work out all the finer details, but I think we've set out the principles of how this would operate, so that in a way that I believe could be implementable.
And also, you want to create more flexibility for magistrates and judges to dish out punishments. So, for example, at the moment, you can be banned from attending football matches if you're guilty of a football match-related offence. But it seems to me you're suggesting that could be a punishment for a totally different crime, if that would be a good way of punishing the person who's been found guilty.
Yeah, exactly right. Same with driving offences. So generally driving, you could have a driving ban that tends to be linked to driving offences. But a driving ban can really be a punishment for somebody. I mean, potentially a 12-month driving ban might be much more of a punishment than spending 1 month in prison.
Oh, so basically, if you're like a serial shoplifter, maybe in future you'll get banned from driving for a year.
Potentially. I don't know whether, truth be told, I suspect our typical shoplifters aren't necessarily all drivers, but yes, in some cases
something else that they like
doing.
They
could be. And look, I'm sure there would be circumstances where we could use a driving ban, say for something like shoplifting. As I say, that probably the typical shoplifter doesn't have a car, but
Sure.
in some cases they will.
Right, there's a couple of things where Shabana Mahmood has gone that you on the review didn't really want to go quite as far. One of the things is about community punishments, and the government today is saying, okay, we could be in a situation where we have people out doing community sentences, and that might include filling potholes in the road for a local authority. Are you on board with that?
Look,
that sounds a bit chain gang-ish.
Yeah, look, as it happens, that, as you say, that wasn't one of our recommendations. There are some challenges that need to be overcome to that. I have to say, I'm not saying no, that's a terrible idea, but there are some practical points that they'll have to address. And I have no objection to the government setting that out as an ambition. But as I say, we focus more on ancillary orders, and if they can resolve some of those practical points, then so be it.
Are you very diplomatically, as a former Justice Secretary, saying that'll be really hard to implement? I think and maybe they'll never even do it.
I think there are some genuine challenges there in terms of implementation, but they may well be able to be overcome. So I'm not saying it's impossible by any means.
That is quite a yes, Minister answer.
It's quite
yes, former Minister.
Adam, I'm trying to be nuanced.
I know you're trying to be diplomatic.
No, I'm sort of saying, I think I wish them well with that. I think if we were to recommended it, we would have needed much more time to consider the pros and cons before making that recommendation. So we didn't particularly get into that area. But as I say, I can absolutely see the case for that.
And then the other issue is what some people call chemical castration. This is giving medication to sex offenders to help them manage their behaviour and their feelings. You talk about this in the review, but it seems the government's going a bit further and rolling out into more prisons in England. Do you think they're going a bit too far with this? Because you talk about it very much as just carry on experimenting. We need to get some more evidence to see if this is actually a thing that works.
Look, our position is different. We think there is a need for more evidence on this. I do think it is an interesting area in terms of potentially lowering risk of reoffending. Sex offenders actually aren't necessarily big reoffenders as it is compared to many other offences. But if one can lower risk even further, I think it is worth exploring. This isn't the right answer for every sex offender, but it might be for some. So our view, or certainly my view, was to say, let's explore this. We were looking at this on the basis of a sort of essentially a voluntary basis. There are definitely
the government's talking about it being mandatory.
Exactly, they're talking about it being mandatory. That's obviously a more radical proposal than we advocated. I think there are some practical challenges with that. I'm not someone who immediately dismisses it out of principle, but I think there are some challenges with that. And I think, as a panel, we were perhaps sceptical that you can go much beyond what we have recommended. But again, let's see on that one.
And I always like to end on a big philosophical point. And I just wonder, because so much of this, what you found, is about public attitudes, political incentives, just how kind of Britain works and feels about crime and justice. And I just wonder if actually changing those things is like a multi-decade process, not just a review over a year and some tweaks to the system. I just wonder if actually you might be pushing it a bit of a closed door here.
Well, I put it this way. There is a sort of philosophical debate about the role of prison within our criminal justice system. My view is that we rely too heavily on that where we are in the debate on this is that too much is about, there's a sense that the only thing that matters is punishment, and the only punishment that matters is prison. And I think both of those views are wrong. I think we need to move away from that, and I think we'd have a healthier debate, and I think we'd have a more effective criminal justice system if we moved away from those two assumptions.
I suppose what I'm getting at is you've made these very well thought through recommendations. Shabana Mahmood has accepted most of them, but to give herself the political cover to accept things like letting people out for good behaviour a third of the way through their sentence, she's got to go tougher on things like chemical castration and saying that convicts will have to fill in potholes. That doesn't suggest to me we're in a different political system that can deal with this in a more nuanced, kinder, more empathetic way.
Well, look, there is a difference between being an ex-politician and being a current politician, and needing to win votes and not having to worry too much about it. That is a fair observation. What I would say overall is whether you accept, if you like, my stance that we're too focused on prison and too focused on punishment at the exclusion of the other objectives within the criminal justice system, we are going to have to take some tough action. You don't have to agree with me to accept that we are going to have to implement what we have recommended or something very close to what we have recommended to avoid a repeat of the emergency early releases. But the debate that we have, the nature of the debate that we have in this country is quite punitive, and there's no getting away from that. And look, at one level, I do understand that. If anyone has been a victim of crime, how angry that makes people, the sense of unfairness and injustice about that. I completely understand it. I would make the argument that if we want to be more effective in reducing crime, more effective in using the limited amount of taxpayers' money that is available to fight crime, we're going to have to think things through, be led by the evidence to a much greater extent than we are at the moment. And it would be great if the debate could perhaps move more in that direction, as it is in some other countries. But look, put that to one side. The point that the Lord Chancellor is making about necessity is fundamentally true. You just can't escape it, and there isn't an easy answer. There isn't just deal with the foreign national offenders or whatever. I mean, we've got recommendations on that as well. You're just going to have to face up to the reality. There are not enough spaces in our prisons to cope with the projected increase in the prison population, and we have to do something about it.
David, thank you very much. But just before you go, I've kind of lost track of it. Are you back in the Conservative Party now?
No, I joined last summer in order to have a vote in the leadership election.
Who did you vote for?
I voted actually for Kemi Badenoch.
And how do you think she's doing?
I think it's a difficult time to be leader of the Conservative Party, but maybe another day. Maybe today is not the day I should pontificate on the state of the Conservative Party.
Well, that small pause spoke more volumes than your 178-page report. David, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Cheers.
Now, as promised, let's get the latest on the public sector pay awards, because the government's announced the numbers today on the basis of the recommendations from the independent review bodies who cover things like teachers, doctors, other healthcare workers, civil servants, prison officers, you name it. Here in the studio with me to help us out is our education editor, Branwen Jeffreys. Hi, Branwen.
Hello.
And we're looking at the big screen from Westminster because Hugh Pym, health editor, is about to step in at any minute.
And
he's
here
putting
he
his coat
is.
down. This is like commentating on the Grand National or something, isn't it? And he is putting the headphones on.
Hello.
And he's fading the microphone up. He's
You're looking
wondering
at me
whether
on a
we're
camera,
there.
aren't you, Adam?
Hello, Hugh.
Hi, are you looking at me on a camera? There's a camera
We are,
honestly
yeah.
close to me, my word.
I think you're too big for that studio.
Well, it's not like it used to be. Cameras in a radio
It's fancier
studio.
now. Anyway, Hugh, you're actually on Newscast right now because we just got started without you.
Ah, well, sorry about that. I've literally come down from DH.
Okay, the Department of Health. Right, we will find out what Wes Streeting was saying in a second. But Branwen, what pay increase are teachers getting?
So teachers in England, I like the little way you slip that in at the end. Teachers in England are being offered a 4% pay award, and crucially, the government has found £615 million somewhere down the back of the sofa to pay for most of it. So 3% of that will be funded, leaving schools to find 1% efficiency. And this is massively different from their initial starting point. The government started by saying 2.8% and you can't have any extra money for it, at which point they were facing the prospect of teacher strikes.
How can an average school save 1% on its budget to then put that on staff costs?
So some of them are not filling behind staff who are leaving. They are being offered some extra advice and support from the government on things like how to get better utility deals, buy supplies at a cheaper rate, all of those kind of things. I have spoken to people running hundreds of schools across England in the last week, asking them, how does it look for next year? And the kind of expression that was being used was, it's grim out here. We're down to bare bones. We're going to dip into our reserves in order to find the 1% savings. They were really worried it was going to be more than 1%. So it's one of those things that the initial offer was looking quite stressful for them.
Yeah.
And they thought they would be facing strikes. So now, today, relief. Yes, they've got to find savings, but no more than they were expecting.
But I suppose we'll have to keep an eye out because that extra £615 million that's been found in the Department for Education budget to pass on to schools to pay for the teachers, that's obviously coming from somewhere.
It is. And there is absolutely nothing in what the government said so far today on where that money is coming from. Now, one of the things that sometimes happens when governments find a little bit of extra cash to smooth things over with the public sector is it comes out of capital spending. In the case of education, that raises questions for me about whether or not we will see, for example, a slowing down in spending on school buildings, which in many places are in a really poor state.
Right, Hugh's all settled now. So what's the picture in the NHS then? Because I know we talk about, the pay rise to the NHS is this, but actually there's lots of different types of jobs within the health service, and it's much more complicated and nuanced than that.
Well, that's right, Adam. And of course, we've seen industrial action in the NHS in England going back to 2022 with the first nurses' strikes and then junior doctors' strikes. And then Labour made great play, Wes Streeting and colleagues, after the election, that they had settled the industrial unrest in the NHS in England and the junior doctors had been sorted. But here we are with a pay award for this year, and I'll just run through the numbers quickly. So resident doctors, formerly known as junior doctors, on average are getting 5.4% this year. Consultants, the more senior doctors and other doctors and dentists will get 4%. And the NHS workers covered by the deal called Agenda for Change, that's nurses, ambulance staff, other hospital workers, they're getting 3.6%. And there was some unhappiness last year amongst the nursing unions, certainly, and some of the other health unions, that they were getting less than the junior doctors as they were then. And it's the same this year. They're getting less than the resident doctors. Now, the government argument is that these awards are all above inflation. They're taking the prediction for this year, 3.2% for inflation, as their guide, rather than the recent 3.5%. everyone's getting above inflation. The junior doctors are getting quite a lot more. But already we've had the BMA, British Medical Association, saying it's not enough. They're balloting anyway next week on a possible industrial action. Now they've got the numbers that will inform that ballot, and they've appealed to West Streeting to come back in for talks. Meanwhile, the GMB union and health union, they say they will ballot members. And I think the RCN, having talked to them, they are not happy at what they've been told is their pay award.
And the BMA, when they're talking about resident doctors, is it that age-old dispute about the fact that what they call pay restoration, that their pay has lagged behind in real terms for multiple years, which is why they need they would argue, a double-digit pay increase?
Exactly. So
Is
going
that
back,
again?
yeah, pay restoration. That was the mantra during those times of strikes. They wanted it restored in real terms, going right back to 2008, and they used the RPI measure of inflation, which always tends to be higher than the CPI measure, which is more widely used. So they're saying that. Do you remember that 35% figure? They said they needed that. That was back in 2022. They're now saying because of successive pay rises, but also inflation, it sort of has come down to about 20%. So they would argue quite a lot more needs to happen to get them back to where they were in real terms. But at the same time, ministers are saying, well, if you look at the junior doctors, resident doctors now over 3 years, it's 28%. Come on, what's not to like about that? Anyway, I think we're going to have quite a few weeks of speculation about what might happen next with the health unions, including the BMA.
And what happened before you walked into the newscast studio at Westminster was you were chatting to Wes Streeting, the health secretary. What did he say?
He was talking on behalf of the government about pay awards in general. And certainly with resident doctors, he feels he's gone quite a long way to work towards restoration, and that the 5.4%, he's making no secret of the fact, yes, it is higher than the other health unions, but he wants to help the resident doctors and he understands their position. With the other health unions, his point is it is above inflation, 3.6%, and he wants to do everything he can to help their working conditions. But I think when it comes to the hard calculations being made by the unions, it'll be the numbers tell their own story, and there is that real frustration. He did say there is no more money. He's not prepared to go back and ask for more. And in terms of how these health pay awards are going to be funded, you'll remember the 2.8% was baked into hospital trust budgets and other employers' budgets. And so if they're paying out 5.4 or 3.6, where's the money coming from? The Department of Health saying it's coming from efficiency savings, the abolition of NHS England, money being saved at the centre, administrative roles, money being reallocated to the front line. Well, actually, a chunk of it is going into these pay packets, though they argue, well, they are front line because they work on the front line.
And Branwen, has it always been like this, where the government has a budget and then the independent pay review bodies come in and bust that budget, and then they have to scrabble around, and either people are happy because money is found or people are unhappy because money is not found, but ultimately plans have to change to take into account these new pay settlements? Has it always been like this?
It's not always the case that governments accept in full the recommendations of the individual pay review bodies. One of the things that they do is look at the labour market. Really, how much do we need to offer to have enough people working in public services? In the case of teachers, if you look at secondary schools, in most secondary subjects, there aren't enough people starting training as teachers and too many people going. It's a real problem. And one of their key pledges for this Labour government is 6,000 more teachers during this Parliament. Well, we've got thousands leaving every year, so that is a real challenge. Pay's one part of that. Today they've been talking about other things like flexibility. Being a teacher is not a very flexible job, and it's a largely female profession. So they're trying to think about how to address that and get more flexibility in terms of working hours. And of course, there are big issues around things like maternity pay for teachers as well.
And Hugh, I mean, this is just one step today for the NHS in England. There's some very big steps coming with this big 10-year plan that's in the pipeline.
Well, exactly. It's going to be a very busy month or so coming up. The 10-year plan for the NHS in England. I've been asking sources at the Department of Health when I was over there a short while ago, and it looks like early July now. And of course, the NHS's birthday is early July, so presentationally that might work quite well. A lot of work still going on that. They've had endless submissions, including from the public. That website where you could send in your views about what to do about the NHS. Some of them were not entirely printable or repeatable. But seriously, a lot of submissions coming in. They've got to try and come up with something which has headlines, which looks like something new, as well as the big themes. There's also, do you want me to run through some of the other things coming up?
Yeah, please do.
So there's a big report on physician associates. You'll remember the row there. The Doctors' Union has been pretty unhappy about the role of physician associates, that they are not doctors. Well, that's obvious, but there's been confusion over their roles, sometimes patients thinking they were doctors. And there's a review going on under Professor Gillian Leng, and it's become quite a toxic row there about physician associates, so we'll have to see how that is dealt with. That's pretty imminent. And then there's a cancer plan in September, which is really important. And that was mentioned at Buckingham Palace recently when the King made a speech to cancer charities and others there. I think so. There's a lot of interest in that coming up.
Lots to think about. Hugh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Branwen, thanks to you too.
My pleasure.